Welcome to Swords and Hammers, where truth comes clothed in tales, and the soul remembers what the mind forgets. The world is loud, but for these few minutes it can wait. Settle in and listen well. The Eye Doctor of Perdido Corners. How Crispin Mole lost his lumber and found his sight. In the village of Perdido Corners, which sat on no map anyone could find, and yet never lacked for visitors, there lived a man named Crispin Mole, who had appointed himself the village eye doctor. He had no credentials for this, unless you count confidence, which he possessed in quantities that would embarrass a king. He carried a small leather case of instruments, tiny silver tweezers, a magnifying lens, and a strip of clean cloth. He also carried, protruding from his left eye at a jaunty angle, a roof beam roughly the length and weight of a young oak. He did not know about the roof beam. This is important. Everyone else knew, of course. You could not miss it. It extended some 6 feet from his face, catching on doorways, upending market carts, and once sweeping an entire row of clay pots off old Nell Cotter's table with a single turn of his head. "Winds are terrible today," he muttered, stepping over the shards. He always believed the wind had done it. Crispin's daily rounds were legendary, not in the way legends are admired, but in the way disasters are remembered. He would peer at you, squinting around the beam with the elaborate focus of a man who has mistaken catastrophe for normal, and announce with medical gravity, "I see a speck. Hold still." Then out came the tweezers. He had diagnosed Wick Jessup with chronic dust of the right eye and attempted extraction on a Monday morning. Wick came away with a scratched cornea and a deep suspicion of helpful people that lasted 14 years. He had cornered Nell at the well and informed her that her left eye contained a sliver of moral imprecision, which he offered to remove free of charge. Nell told him where he could store his tweezers. The language was vivid, but her instinct was correct. He had examined the merchants, the children, the widows, and the dogs. The dogs, to their credit, bit him. Here is the joke that was not a joke. The more eyes he inspected, the more certain he became of his gift. Every speck confirmed his calling. Every wince from a patient proved the delicacy of the work. Every flinch was interpreted as gratitude not yet matured. He could not see that he could not see, and his blindness fed on itself the way fire eats its own smoke. Now, someone will ask, did nobody tell him? Of course they told him. Wick said plainly, "Crispin, you have a plank in your eye the size of a fence rail." Crispin laughed and replied, "Wick, you always exaggerate. That is why your right eye waters." Nell said, "You are a walking lumber yard, Crispin Mole." Crispin shook his head. "Nell, projection is a common symptom. I could look into that for you." Even the dogs had tried, in their canine way, to communicate the problem. Crispin interpreted the biting as professional envy. One evening, a child wandered into Perdido Corners from no direction anyone could name. She was small, sun-darkened, and carried nothing but a round hand mirror in a copper frame. Nobody knew her name, and she did not offer one, which in Perdido Corners was considered either very rude or very holy. She sat on the stone wall, near the well, watching Crispin make his evening rounds. She watched him diagnose the miller's wife with a fleck of vanity, left pupil. She watched him trip over his own beam and curse the cobblestones for their unevenness. She watched Nell duck behind a rain barrel the moment his shadow rounded the corner. Then the child did something no one in Perdido Corners had ever thought to do. She walked up to Crispin Mole, held the mirror level with his face, and said nothing. Not one word. She simply held the glass steady and let it do what glass does. Crispin looked. For the first time in years, possibly decades, Crispin Mole saw his own face. What he saw was a man with a roof beam jutting from his eye like the mast of a wrecked ship. A man whose entire posture had warped around the weight of it, leaning and compensating and calling the crooked architecture wisdom. The leather case of instruments slipped from his fingers. The tweezers clinked against the cobblestones. "That cannot be right," he whispered. The child said nothing. The mirror said everything. He reached up slowly, and his fingers found the timber. The horror was not that the beam was there. The horror was that it had always been there, and he had built his entire life around it, and called the crooked architecture a superior design. What happened next was not dignified. Plank removal never is. He gripped the beam with both hands and pulled, and the sound he made was not a word, but something far older and more honest than language. It was the sound of a man discovering that what he called his strongest conviction was his deepest wound. He fell to his knees in the square, weeping the way a child weeps, who has only just learned what he has broken. The sawdust began to settle around him in a fine golden cloud. His left eye, freed for the first time from its long obstruction, watered and burned and saw. What it saw first was Wick Jessop's face, not angry, but wearing the cautious hope of a man who has been hurt by help and is not sure he can survive another offer. What it saw second was Nell, still behind the rain barrel, wearing the weariness of a woman corrected by everyone and understood by no one. What it saw third was his own reflection, still caught in the child's copper mirror, red-eyed, tear-streaked, ridiculous, and for the first time in his life, actually seeing. Every correction he had ever given was autobiography. Every diagnosis, a confession he didn't know he was making. The sins that had enraged him most in others were the sins he knew best in himself. He had recognized them not from wisdom, but from kinship. Crispin Mole did not stop helping people with their eyes. You should know that. It is the part of the story most people get wrong. They hear the tale and think the moral is mind your own business, but the moral is far older and far sharper. He went to Wick first. He did not bring his tweezers. He brought his hands, still shaking, and said, "I have done you harm, and I am sorry. And if you ever need help with that eye again, I think I can see now." Wick studied him cautiously. "Your eye is clear," Wick said, slowly, as if he could not quite believe his own words. "It is," said Crispin. "It hurts like fire. I think that is how you know." He went to Nell next. The conversation was harder, because Nell had been corrected so often by so many lumber yards that she had stopped believing correction could come from love. He did not correct her. He sat beside her and said, "I was the worst eye doctor this village has ever seen. And Nell, you knew it, long before I did." Nell laughed. It was the first time she had laughed about any of it. "You were a catastrophe," she said, not unkindly. "I was," he said. "I was a man with a log in his eye, offering surgery." The child with the mirror was gone by morning. No one could say when she had departed, or where, or whether she had been a child at all, or something else, wearing a child's skin, for the sake of mercy. She left the copper mirror. It was on the stone wall, by the well. It stayed there for years. Anyone who passed it could look in, if they dared. Most walked a little faster when they neared it. Some stopped. Crispin kept his leather case, but he opened it less often now, and when he did, his hands moved with a gentleness they had never possessed before. It was the gentleness of a man who has been on the operating table himself, and knows exactly what the surgery costs, because the scars on his own face are still fresh and still teach him something every morning. He was not the most gifted eye doctor in Perdido Corners. He was merely the only honest one. And that, in a village full of planks and specks, in a world where every man carries some timber he would rather not name, was enough. It was more than enough. It was the beginning of sight. Seller.